A seat in business class is a symbol of success, a quiet haven of luxury, suspended 30,000 feet in the air. But for 17-year-old Zoe Monroe, Seat 1A on Aura Air Flight 710 from New York to London became a stage for public humiliation. She was young, she was black, and she wore a simple grey hoodie. To the senior flight attendant, that meant she didn't belong. The crew would make a decision backed by a sneering passenger to remove her, making an example of what they saw as an imposter. They had no idea they were committing career suicide because they weren't just kicking off a passenger, they were dethroning the daughter of the man who signed their paychecks. John F. Kennedy International Airport was a symphony of controlled chaos, a river of humanity flowing through gleaming corridors. For Zoe Monroe, it was just background noise. With her noise-cancelling headphones over her ears, the world was muted, allowing her to focus on the lines and shapes of the people rushing past. Her sketchbook was open on her lap, a charcoal pencil dancing across the page, capturing the harried expression of a man talking animatedly into his phone while trying to wrangle a rolling suitcase with a rebellious wheel. Zoe was not what most people pictured when they thought of a passenger in Aura Air's exclusive Atmosphere Lounge. At 17, she was poised on the brink of adulthood with an artist's observant eyes that saw more than they let on. She wore no designer labels, just a comfortable, well-worn grey hoodie from her high school's art club, dark jeans, and a pair of classic sneakers. Her wealth wasn't on her clothes. It was in her portfolio, in her quiet confidence, and in the name printed on her boarding pass, Monroe. Aura Air was her father's creation. Robert Monroe had built it from 3 leased aircraft and a dream into a transatlantic giant. He was a titan of the industry, a man whose story was the stuff of business legend, a self-made innovator who had democratized luxury travel. His airline's motto, plastered on every screen and brochure, was Aura Air, every passenger elevated. For Zoe, it was just Dad's company. She had flown countless times, but always preferred to be inconspicuous, to just be another face in the crowd. Today was different. Her grandmother in London had fallen ill, and her father had booked her on the next flight out, putting her in Seat 1A, the prime seat in the first-class cabin, for her comfort and safety on the overnight journey. As the boarding call for Flight 710 to London Heathrow echoed through the lounge, Zoe packed away her sketchbook, slung her worn leather satchel over her shoulder, and joined the priority line. The gate agent, a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a practiced smile, glanced at Zoe's casual attire, and for a fleeting moment, her smile tightened, a micro-expression of doubt. She scanned Zoe's pass. The machine beeped green. "Enjoy your flight, miss," the agent said, her professional mask back in place, though her eyes followed Zoe down the jet bridge. Zoe felt the familiar prickle of being assessed and found wanting. She'd felt it before in high-end stores in fancy restaurants. It was the silent question, "Do you belong here?" She had learned long ago to ignore it, to hold her head high, and proceed as if she owned the very ground she walked on. In a way, today she did. Stepping onto the Airbus A350 was like entering another world. The business-class cabin, branded Aura 1, was a masterpiece of design. Polished chrome, soft mood lighting, and sleek privacy pods whispered exclusivity. A flight attendant with a plastic smile greeted her at the door. "Welcome aboard." Zoe found her seat 1A, a spacious pod at the very front of the cabin, with its own closet and an expansive screen. She stowed her satchel in the overhead bin, settled into the plush leather seat, and pulled out a novel. She was looking forward to the 7-hour flight, a chance to read sketch and maybe watch a movie before landing in London. She was so absorbed in her book that she barely noticed the other passengers filtering in. She did, however, notice the man who stopped dead in the aisle beside her pod. He was in his late 50s, dressed in an expensive but ill-fitting suit, his face florid and impatient. He looked at Zoe, then at the seat number above her head, then back at Zoe. A sneer formed on his lips. He flagged down a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low conspiratorial rumble, loud enough for Zoe to hear clearly. "I think there may be a mistake. This young lady is in my seat." The flight attendant, a junior crew member, smiled apologetically. "Let me see your boarding pass, sir." He produced it with a flourish. "Gerald Finney, seat 2A, right behind." "This one." He gestured dismissively toward Zoe. "But I think there's been a mix-up. Perhaps she's in the wrong cabin entirely. Easy mistake to make." The junior attendant looked flustered. Zoe calmly lowered her book. "There's no mistake," she said, her voice even. "I'm in seat 1A. Mr. Finney let out a short, unpleasant laugh. "Right, and I'm the King of England." Before the junior attendant could respond, another figure glided into the scene. She was older than the first attendant, with a severe haircut and a name badge that read Brenda Davies, Senior Flight Attendant. Her authority was palpable, her smile thin and sharp as a razor. She assessed the situation with a sweeping, judgmental gaze that lingered on Zoe's hoodie. "Is there a problem here?" Brenda asked, her voice dripping with a saccharine professionalism that didn't quite mask her condescension. Mr. Finney puffed out his chest. "Yes, there is. I'm a Platinum Elite member. I fly this route twice a month. I pay a premium for this cabin to be a professional environment, and I find this child in the premier seat. I'm just concerned she might be lost." The insult was clear. Zoe's jaw tightened, but she refused to rise to the bait. Brenda turned her full, patronizing attention to Zoe. "Ma'am," she began the word ma'am, sounding more like an accusation than a courtesy. "Could I please see your boarding pass?" Zoe met her gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She reached into her pocket and produced her phone, displaying the digital pass. Brenda leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. The name Monroe was clearly visible. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed Brenda's face. The name was, of course, the same as the airline's founder, but she quickly dismissed it as a coincidence, a common name. This girl didn't fit the profile. She was a kid dressed for a bus ride, not a transatlantic business suite. The narrative in Brenda's head was already written. "I see," Brenda said, slowly, handing the phone back. Her eyes narrowed. "It's just that this is a very expensive seat. We've had issues recently with fraudulent bookings, stolen points, things of that nature. I just need to be extra careful." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Zoe's blood ran cold. This was no longer about a simple misunderstanding. This was an attack on her character, a public questioning of her right to exist in this space. "My ticket is valid," Zoe stated, her voice dangerously quiet. "I suggest you check your manifest if you have a problem." Brenda smiled, a tight, unpleasant curl of her lips. "Oh, I will, ma'am. I will." She turned to Mr. Finney. "Please take your seat, sir. I'll handle this." As Mr. Finney settled into 2A with a smug grin, Brenda walked toward the galley, her back ramrod straight. Zoe watched her go, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The quiet she had so enjoyed just minutes before was gone, replaced by a storm she could feel gathering just over the horizon. The cabin door was sealed with a heavy thud, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, a cheerful, disembodied welcome. As the plane began its slow, lumbering pushback from the gate, Zoe tried to lose herself in her book again, but the words swam meaninglessly on the page. She could feel the eyes of Mr. Finney boring into the back of her head. She could sense the whispers among the crew in the forward galley. She was no longer a passenger. She was a spectacle, an anomaly to be dealt with. Brenda Davies returned no longer alone. She was accompanied by the flight's purser, a man named Mark, whose face was a mask of strained neutrality. He clutched a tablet, his knuckles white. Brenda leaned down, creating a bubble of false intimacy around Zoe's seat. "Miss Monroe," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "We seem to have a little discrepancy." Zoe closed her book, marking her page with a deliberate slowness she did not feel. "What kind of discrepancy?" Mark the purser cleared his throat. "Our system is flagging this ticket. It was booked last minute with an executive override code that is unusual for a non-employee booking. We need to verify your identity and your right to this seat." The lie was slick and well-rehearsed. There was no flag, no system error. This was a narrative they were constructing brick by brick to justify their prejudice. The override code was her father's personal booking credential reserved for family and top executives. It was the digital equivalent of a royal seal. "My identity is on my passport, which your gate agent checked," Zoe said, her patience wearing thin. "My right to this seat is on my boarding pass, which you've all ready seen." "A passport doesn't prove how the ticket was purchased," Brenda countered smoothly. "These fraudulent schemes are very sophisticated." From the seat behind her, Mr. Finney chimed in, his voice oozing with false concern. "Just let them do their job, young lady. If it's all legitimate, there's nothing to worry about. We all want to feel safe." His intervention was like gasoline on a flame. It emboldened Brenda. "He's right," she said, straightening up and raising her voice just enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "For the security and comfort of all our guests in Aura 1, we need to ensure everyone here belongs here." The phrase "belongs here" was a dagger. Zoe felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of anger and humiliation. This was a meticulously orchestrated campaign to shame her into submission. "Are you accusing me of stealing this ticket?" Zoe asked, her voice dropping to a steely calm. She would not shout. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her lose control. "We're not accusing you of anything," Mark said quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. "We're simply trying to resolve a ticketing irregularity." "Then resolve it," Zoe challenged. "Call your ticketing office. Check the payment method. The credit card used is under the same name, Robert Monroe. You can verify it." She had played her card, a name that should have stopped them in their tracks, a name that was emblazoned on the tail of the very plane they were standing in. Brenda exchanged a look with Mark. A flicker of something was it hesitation crossed his face, but Brenda's expression hardened. She had gone too far down this path to turn back now. To her, the name was just part of the bluff. A clever fraudster would of course use a name associated with the airline. "Anyone can say a name," Brenda scoffed, her voice now dripping with open disdain. "We need proof. Do you have a corporate ID, a letter from Mr. Monroe authorizing your travel?" "I don't need a letter to travel on a ticket my father bought for me." Zoe said the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. The disbelief on Brenda's face was comical. "Your father, Robert Monroe, is your father?" She let out a short, sharp laugh. Several passengers nearby who had been pretending not to listen now turned their heads openly. The drama was unfolding, and they had front-row seats. Yes, Zoe said, her chin held high. He is. Brenda shook her head, a pitying look on her face. Miss, please, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Lying is only going to make things worse. We have a procedure for this. It was then that another passenger spoke up. A woman in seat 3D with sharp, intelligent eyes and a tailored blazer had been watching the entire exchange. Excuse me, she said, her voice clear and authoritative. I am Dr. Lena Petrova, a professor of ethics at Columbia, and what I am witnessing is an appalling abuse of authority. You have checked the young woman's boarding pass, and I presume her identification. Your continued harassment, based on what appears to be pure conjecture and prejudice, is unacceptable. You are creating a hostile environment for this passenger and everyone around her. Brenda's head snapped toward Dr. Petrova. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a crew matter. It concerns the safety and security of my flight. It concerns basic human decency, Dr. Petrova retorted. You've publicly accused her of fraud with zero evidence. I am a witness to this entire exchange, and it is deeply unprofessional. Brenda's face was now a mask of fury. She had been challenged, her authority questioned. She turned back to Zoe, her voice cold as ice. That settles it. You are a disruptive passenger. Mark, call the captain. Inform him we have a situation. Mark, who had been looking increasingly pale, just nodded and hurried toward the cockpit. Zoe felt a profound sense of unreality. The plane was taxiing toward the runway. Outside the window, the blue lights of the taxiway slid past like distant stars. Inside this cabin, her world was shrinking, the walls of their baseless accusations closing in around her. She had given them the name, the one key that should have unlocked their understanding. Instead, they had used it to lock the door and throw away the key, convinced they were in the right. They saw a black girl in a hoodie, and their minds could not compute any reality where she was anything other than an imposter. Brenda stood over her, a triumphant glint in her eyes. The captain has been informed, she said, her voice low and venomous. We will be returning to the gate. You will be deplaning. The aircraft, which had been moments from turning onto the main runway, began a slow, ponderous turn. The change in direction sent a murmur through the entire plane. In economy, it was a sigh of annoyance at the delay. In business class, it was a rustle of nervous anticipation. Everyone in the forward cabin knew the reason. All eyes were on seat 1A. Zoe felt 100 gazes on her, each one a pinprick against her skin. Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over her, followed by a chilling numbness. She stared out the window, focusing on the distant lights of the city, trying to transport herself anywhere but here. She thought of her father. He had always taught her to handle problems with grace and intelligence, to never let anyone diminish her. But how could she fight this? She was a teenager against the uniformed authority of an airline crew, their power absolute in this metal tube. Dr. Petrova tried to intervene one last time. This is a disgrace, she said loudly to Mark as he passed. You're delaying an international flight and traumatizing a young person over a power trip. Mark refused to meet her eyes. It's a security protocol, ma'am. Brenda, however, was impervious. She stood by Zoe's seat like a guard. Her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and impatience. She had won. She had identified an intruder in her pristine cabin and was now efficiently removing her. In her mind, she was a hero, protecting the sanctity of Aura One for paying customers like Mr. Finney, who was now leaning back in his seat, a smug, satisfied smirk on his face. The plane docked at the gate with a gentle bump that felt like a gavel coming down. The jet bridge, which had been a passage to a new adventure, was now a corridor for a walk of shame. The captain's voice came over the speaker flat and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are dealing with a minor ticketing issue and will be on our way shortly." A ticketing issue. That's what they were calling her. The main cabin door was opened. A gate supervisor, a man with a harried expression, and 2 airport security officers stepped aboard. The presence of the officers sent a fresh wave of shock through the cabin. This was no longer just a disagreement. It was a security incident. The supervisor, briefed by Brenda, approached Zoe with a tired, perfunctory air. "Miss," he said, not even bothering to use her name, "we need you to come with us." Zoe looked at the 2 officers. They weren't aggressive, but their uniformed presence was an undeniable show of force. They were there to ensure she complied. Any resistance now would be futile and frankly terrifying. She was a black teenager being confronted by security. She knew how quickly stories like this could turn ugly, even tragic. She looked at Brenda, whose face was a stony mask of victory. She looked at Mr. Finney, who was watching with undisguised glee. She looked at Dr. Petrova, who gave her a look of profound sympathy and helplessness. Slowly, deliberately, Zoe began to gather her things. She took her book and slipped it into her satchel. She unplugged her headphones. She moved with a grace and dignity that she didn't feel her every motion a silent act of defiance. She would not cry. She would not scream. She would not give them that satisfaction. As she stood up to leave her seat, Brenda spoke one last time, her voice laced with condescending advice. "Next time, dear, you should purchase a ticket you can afford. It saves everyone a lot of trouble." That was it. The final patronizing jab that broke through Zoe's carefully constructed composure. She stopped, turned, and looked directly into Brenda's eyes. "You have no idea what you've just done." Zoe said, her voice low but carrying the weight of an earthquake. It wasn't a threat, but a statement of fact, delivered with a chilling certainty that momentarily wiped the smugness from Brenda's face. Zoe then turned and walked down the aisle, the supervisor in front of her, the security officers behind. The whispers of the other passengers followed her like a physical force. She kept her eyes fixed on the open door, the square of light at the end of the jet bridge. As she stepped off the plane, she heard the door hiss shut behind her. The sound was so final. She was alone, standing in the sterile, brightly lit jet bridge, the very plane she was supposed to be on, now preparing to leave without her. The gate agent who had checked her in earlier was standing at the end of the bridge, looking down at her shoes, refusing to meet Zoe's gaze. She was escorted back into the terminal, a place that had felt full of promise an hour ago, and now felt like a cold, hostile cage. The supervisor led her to a small, windowless office near the gate. "Someone from customer relations will be here to discuss your options," he said mechanically, before turning to leave, closing the door behind him. The options. A refund, perhaps. A seat on the next day's flight in economy, no doubt. They thought they were dealing with a nobody, a kid who had tried to cheat the system and failed. Zoe sat down on a hard plastic chair in the silent, sterile room. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching hurt. It wasn't just about the seat or the flight. It was about the ugly, casual cruelty of it all. The way they had looked at her, judged her, and dismissed her all based on the color of her skin and the clothes she wore. They had stripped her of her dignity in front of a plane full of strangers. She took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Crying wouldn't help. She reached into her satchel and pulled out her phone. There was only one person to call. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over the name Dad. She pressed the call button. It rang twice before he picked up his voice, warm and familiar. "Hey, sweetie," Robert Monroe said. "You should be in the air by now. Everything okay?" Zoe's composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly. They kicked me off the plane." On the other end of the line in his study overlooking Central Park, Robert Monroe froze. He was in the middle of reviewing quarterly fuel expenditure reports, but the world narrowed to the sound of his daughter's shaken voice. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice sharp with sudden concern. "Kicked you off? What are you talking about, Zoe? They said my ticket was fraudulent." Zoe explained the words, tumbling out as she relayed the whole humiliating saga. She told him about Mr. Finney's sneering complaint, about Brenda's condescending interrogation, about Mark's spineless complicity. She described being accused of lying about who her father was, the arrival of the security officers, and the final venomous piece of advice from the senior flight attendant. Robert listened in absolute silence. His study, normally a place of calm and focus, felt like the inside of a pressure cooker. With every word Zoe spoke, the pressure mounted. He was a man known for his unflappable demeanor, a titan of industry who navigated billion-dollar deals and hostile takeovers with a cool head. But this was not business. This was his daughter, his only child, who he had raised to be strong, kind, and confident, had just been publicly humiliated by the very people who wore the uniform of the company he had poured his life into. The airline wasn't just a business to him. It was his legacy. He had started it with a mission to create a better travel experience, one built on respect and service. He too had faced a lifetime of slights and prejudices on his way to the top. He knew the sting of being judged by the color of his skin. The idea that his own company, his own employees were now perpetuating that same brand of ugliness and directing it at his daughter filled him with a rage so profound it was glacial. It was cold, hard, and immense. When Zoe finished, there was a heavy silence on the line. "Dad, are you there?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm here, sweetie," he said, his voice now dangerously calm. "Tell me exactly where you are." "Some little office by gate B32. They said a customer relations person was coming." "Don't talk to them," Robert commanded. "Don't talk to anyone. Are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm fine," she said, though her voice wavered. "Just angry and embarrassed." "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," he said fiercely. "They are the ones who should be embarrassed. They are the ones who will be held accountable. I promise you that. Sit tight. I'm going to make a few calls. Someone will be with you in minutes. I love you." "Love you too, Dad." He hung up the phone and stared at the city lights for a full 10 seconds. His jaw clenched so tight, a muscle pulsed. Then he moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying. He didn't call the head of customer service. He didn't call the JFK station manager. He went straight to the top. His first call was to David Chen, his chief operating officer, a man who was usually asleep at this hour. "David," Robert said, dispensing with pleasantries. "Wake up. We have a 5-alarm fire." He explained the situation in cold, clipped sentences. No emotion, just facts. "Aura Air Flight 710, JFK to Heathrow. My daughter Zoe Monroe was forcibly removed from her seat 1A by the cabin crew, led by a senior flight attendant named Brenda Davies. They accused her of fraud and of lying about her identity. They returned the aircraft to the gate and had her escorted off by security." On the other end of the line, David Chen was scrambling his mind, racing to grasp the sheer magnitude of the disaster.
Robert, I don't know what to say. Are you sure?
Am I sure my daughter was kicked off my own plane? Yes, David, I'm damn sure, Robert snapped. I want that flight crew grounded the moment they touch down at Heathrow. I don't want them working another flight. I want them met on the jet bridge by our VP of European Operations. I want them suspended pending a full investigation. Get their names, all of them. The purser, the flight attendants, the captain who authorized the return to gate. Everyone. Consider it done, David said, now fully alert. Find out the name of the passenger in 2A, a Gerald Finney. He instigated the complaint. I want to know everything about him. His company, his flight history, his loyalty status, everything. Right away. And David, Robert said, his voice dropping lower. Get our head of security at JFK to Zoe's location gate B32, a side office immediately. I want him to personally escort her to the flagship lounge and ensure she is treated like royalty until I can arrange a private jet to get her to London. No more Aura Air employees are to speak to her, except for my personal liaison. I'm on it, Robert. I am so sorry. Sorry isn't going to fix this, David. Actions will. He hung up. His next call was to his legal team. His third was to the head of corporate communications. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It had made landfall right in the heart of Aura Air's executive suite. Robert Monroe was not just a father protecting his child. He was the founder of a company, witnessing the rot of its own culture. And he was about to perform surgery without anesthetic. Meanwhile, back in the small, sterile office at JFK, Zoe sat waiting. Less than 10 minutes after she had hung up with her father, the door opened. It wasn't a customer relations agent. It was a man in a sharp suit. His face etched with concern, flanked by 2 other airport personnel in managerial uniforms. Miss Monroe, the man in the suit said, his voice filled with a deference that was jarring after the treatment she'd just received. My name is Frank Miller. I'm the head of airport security for Aura Air. Your father sent me. Please come with me. We are so deeply sorry for the misunderstanding. Zoe stood up. Her earlier feeling of helplessness replaced by a dawning awareness of the power her father was now wielding. As Frank Miller led her out of the office and through the terminal employees in Aura Air uniforms who saw them coming seemed to shrink back, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. The word was spreading. Something terrible had happened. They didn't just take her to the business lounge. They took her to the Aura Pinnacle Suite, a private invitation-only sanctuary, hidden away from the main lounge reserved for celebrities and VVIPs. The opulence was staggering. A private chef was on standby. A full media suite was at her disposal. The shift was dizzying. An hour ago, she was a suspected criminal being escorted off a plane. Now she was being treated like a head of state. But the luxury felt hollow. It couldn't erase the memory of Brenda's sneer or the stares of the other passengers. Zoe sat on a velvet couch overlooking the airfield. In the distance, she could see the blinking lights of a plane ascending into the night sky. Flight 710. It was on its way to London carrying a cabin crew and at least one passenger who were flying blissfully unaware into the biggest professional storm of their lives. And Zoe knew with absolute certainty that by the time they landed, their world would be turned upside down. For the 7-hour that Aura Air Flight 710 was airborne, a sense of smug tranquility settled over the Aura 1 cabin. Brenda Davies moved with an extra spring in her step, her authority reaffirmed. She was gracious and attentive to Mr. Finney, refilling his champagne glass with a conspiratorial smile, accepting his praise for keeping standards high. "You did the right thing," he told her, his voice low. "Can't have just anyone wandering in here. It dilutes the brand." Brenda felt a swell of pride. She was a brand protector, a gatekeeper of luxury. The incident with the girl had been unpleasant but necessary. The captain had even commended her for her proactive approach to a potential security concern. She had followed procedure, asserted her authority, and removed a problem. By the time they began their descent into a grey, drizzly London morning, the event was already a story she was polishing, to tell her colleagues a tale of her sharp instincts and commitment to excellence. Mark, the purser, was less at ease. He had a nagging feeling that something was wrong, a sense of a thread being pulled that would unravel something important. The girl's final words echoed in his mind. "You have no idea what you've just done." As the Airbus A350 taxied to its gate at Heathrow's Terminal 5, the crew prepared for a routine arrival. But the moment the jet bridge connected, the routine was shattered. Standing at the open aircraft door was not the usual ground crew manager. It was Eleanor Vance, the Vice President of European Operations for Aura Air. Eleanor was a legend in the company, a formidable no-nonsense executive who was rarely seen on the front lines unless there was a major crisis. She was flanked by two stern-looking individuals in suits. Eleanor's eyes, cold as a winter sea, scanned the crew. "Brenda Davies, Mark Collins?" she asked, her voice clipped. Brenda stepped forward, a smile forming on her face, assuming this was a surprise VIP greeting. "Eleanor, what a surprise to see you." The smile died on her lips as Eleanor held up a hand. "There will be no pleasantries. You and Mr. Collins are to come with me. Now, your crew will handle the disembarking passengers. Your credentials and IDs. Surrender them." The demand was so shocking, so out of protocol, that Brenda could only stammer. I don't understand. Is there a problem?" "The problem, Ms. Davies, is of a magnitude you cannot currently comprehend," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Your IDs. Now!" Shaking Brenda and a ghostly pale Mark handed over their corporate identification cards. They were then escorted off the plane, not into the terminal, but down a service stairway to a waiting black car on the tarmac. The humiliation was absolute. They were being treated like criminals, spirited away from the view of passengers and other staff. As they were driven to Aura Air's corporate offices at the airport, the truth was laid out for them in a sterile conference room by a grim-faced HR director and a lawyer from the London office. "The passenger you removed from Flight 710 at JFK," the HR director began. His eyes fixed on a file in front of him, was named Zoe Monroe. Brenda nodded. Yes, there was a ticketing irregularity. She was being disruptive and... The director cut her off. There was no irregularity. The ticket was purchased using Robert Monroe's personal executive account. The disruption was you accusing the founder and CEO's daughter of being a liar and a thief on her father's own aircraft. The silence in the room was deafening. Brenda's world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, leaving her with a sickly grey pallor. Monroe. She had thought it was a coincidence, a common name. Her mind frantically replayed the entire incident, but now every detail was cast in a horrifying new light. The girl's quiet confidence, her refusal to be intimidated, her final chilling words. It all made sense now. Mark looked like he was going to be physically ill. He slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. You are both suspended effective immediately without pay." The HR director continued his tone merciless. "You are not to contact any other Aura Air employees. You are not to access any company systems. An internal investigation is underway, and I assure you it will be swift and thorough. Your careers with this airline are over. The only thing left to determine is the scope of the legal and civil damages you have caused." Brenda stared at him, her mind a maelstrom of denial and panic. But the other passenger, Mr. Finney," he complained. "He said she didn't belong. He'll back me up." The lawyer spoke for the first time, a dry, humorless smile on his face. "Gerald Finney," he said, consulting a tablet, "has had his Aura Air Platinum Elite status permanently revoked. His 2.5 million frequent flyer miles have been voided, and a formal letter of complaint regarding his conduct citing his discriminatory language and harassment of a minor is being drafted and sent to his employer, the investment bank Barclays. I suspect Mr. Finney is about to have a very bad day." The scale of the fallout was breathtaking. This wasn't just a reprimand. This was a corporate decapitation. Robert Monroe was not just firing them. He was salting the earth where they stood. Back in the terminal, the story was also reaching Mr. Finney. As he switched on his phone after landing, he was greeted by a series of emails from Aura Air. The first was a notification of his immediate and permanent ban from the airline. The second was a receipt showing his mileage balance had been reset to 0. The third was a formal notice that the airline was reserving its right to take further action. He stared at his phone in disbelief, his face turning from its usual florid red to a blotchy purple. He tried to call the Platinum Elite service line, a number he had on speed dial. An automated voice answered, "We're sorry, our records indicate that you are not eligible for this service." He was a nobody again, stripped of the status that was so integral to his identity. And across the Atlantic, Dr. Lena Petrova, the ethics professor, also received an email as she connected to the airport Wi-Fi. It was from the office of Robert Monroe. It thanked her profusely for her attempt to intervene and for her decency. It informed her that her entire round-trip flight had been refunded. Her loyalty account had been credited with 1 million miles, and that Mr. Monroe would like to personally invite her to be a consultant on a new passenger's Bill of Rights and Sensitivity training program the airline was launching. The wheels of karma were not just turning. They were spinning at blinding speed, delivering justice and consequences with surgical precision. For Brenda and Mark, sitting in disgrace in a cold London office, the horrifying truth had finally dawned. They hadn't been protecting the brand. They had attacked its very heart. 3 days later, the atmosphere in the 50th floor boardroom of Aura Air's Manhattan headquarters was thick with tension. The vast expanse of glass offered a panoramic view of the city, but no one was looking at the scenery. All eyes were on the man at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, Robert Monroe. He hadn't slept much in the past 72 hours. He had flown to London on a private jet, picked up Zoe, and spent a day with her and his ailing mother, assuring them both that everything was being handled. Zoe, resilient and wise beyond her years, was more concerned about him than herself. "Don't burn the whole thing down, Dad," she had told him, only half joking. But Robert knew that sometimes you had to burn down a rotten structure to build something stronger in its place. Now he was back in New York, and the reckoning had come. Assembled in the boardroom were the key players: David Chen, his COO, the heads of legal, HR, and corporate communications, and via a secure video link from London, a pale and visibly terrified Brenda Davies and Mark Collins. They were not there to offer a defense. They were there to bear witness. Robert began to speak, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of steel that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "Good morning," he said, his eyes sweeping across the room before settling on the video screen. "For 20 years we have built this company on a simple promise: every passenger elevated. It's not just a marketing slogan. It was meant to be our guiding principle. It means that from the moment someone steps into our airport to the moment they leave, they are treated with dignity, respect, and care. It means we see the person, not their clothes, their age, or the color of their skin." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Last Tuesday, that promise was not just broken. It was shattered. It was shattered by ignorance, by arrogance, and by a deep-seated prejudice that I find utterly sickening." He looked directly at the screen, at the faces of Brenda and Mark. "You didn't just insult a passenger. You didn't just inconvenience a teenager. You insulted my daughter. You told my child, a child who has grown up around this airline, who has seen the work and sacrifice that went into building it, that she did not belong. You did this on one of our aircraft while wearing our uniform. You became the face of everything I have spent my life fighting against." Brenda began to speak, her voice trembling. "Mr. Monroe, sir, I am so sorry. It was a terrible judgment call. I was trying to enforce policy." Robert held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "Do not speak of policy to me, Ms. Davies. I wrote the policies. There is no policy at Aura Air that encourages the public humiliation of a minor. There is no procedure that instructs our crew to prejudge a passenger based on their appearance. What you enacted was not company policy. It was your own personal ugly bias. And you, Mr. Collins, you stood by and allowed it to happen. Your silence was compliance. It was cowardice." He let his gaze drift around the boardroom table at his executive team. "And this failure is also ours. It is mine. This rot, this culture that allowed an employee like Ms. Davies to feel so empowered in her prejudice, it grew under our watch. So today, we are not just dealing with 2 disgraced employees. We are dealing with a cancer in our own company. And we are going to cut it out." He then laid out the consequences, each sentence landing like a hammer blow. "Ms. Davies, your employment with Aura Air is terminated effective immediately. A note will be placed in your permanent record detailing gross misconduct, discrimination, and endangerment of a minor's welfare. We will be contesting your unemployment claim, and our legal team will be in touch regarding a civil suit for damages to this company's reputation. I assure you, you will not work in this industry again. Mr. Collins, your employment is also terminated. Your failure to act, to de-escalate, to protect a passenger makes you complicit in the entire affair. Consider your career as a purser over." He turned off the video feed without another word, leaving their shocked faces frozen for a moment before the screen went black. But he was not finished. "David," he said to his COO, "I want a complete overhaul of our senior cabin crew training. I am bringing in Dr. Lena Petrova from Columbia as a lead consultant. We will design a new empathy and implicit bias training program. It will be mandatory for all 4,000 of our cabin crew members, starting with the most senior. Anyone who fails the certification will be moved to a non-passenger-facing role or offered a severance package. No exceptions. Furthermore," he continued, "we are instituting the Zoe Monroe rule. Any employee, from a gate agent to a captain, who initiates the deplaning of a passenger for a non-violent, non-threatening ticketing or behavioral issue must have secondary remote authorization from a dedicated central operations supervisor who will review the situation via live video feed if possible. No more unilateral decisions based on instinct. We will build a system of checks and balances to protect our passengers from the biases of our employees. Finally, he addressed the head of communications. We are not hiding from this. We are going to issue a public statement. We will not name my daughter, but we will state that a young passenger was unacceptably mistreated by our crew due to racial and age-based prejudice. We will be transparent about the steps we are taking, including the terminations and the new training initiatives. We will apologize, and we will promise to do better. We will own our failure. The room was turbulent, the executives absorbing the sheer scale of the changes. This was not a cleanup. This was a revolution from the top down. Robert Monroe was using this painful personal incident as a catalyst to remake the soul of his company. He stood up, his gaze sweeping over his team one last time. Our brand is not the polished chrome or the leather seats. It is the trust our passengers place in us. We violated that trust, and we will work every single day to earn it back. Now get to work. He walked out of the boardroom, leaving a team that was both terrified and inspired. The story of what happened on Flight 710 would become a legend within Aura Air. A cautionary tale of what happens when you forget the human being behind the boarding pass. And for Robert Monroe, it was a painful but necessary reminder that a legacy isn't just about what you build, it's about what you are willing to tear down to protect it. 6 months later, Zoe Monroe sat in seat 1A on an Aura Air flight to London, her sketchbook open on her lap. The flight attendant who approached her was young, with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "Miss Monroe," she said warmly, "can I get you anything before we take off? A drink? A warm towel?" "I'm fine for now, thank you," Zoe replied, smiling back. The flight attendant nodded. "Well, if you need anything at all, my name is Sarah. It's an honor to have you on board. My colleagues and I, we all took the new training program. The Elevate module. It's changed things, for the better." She spoke with a quiet sincerity that Zoe knew was real. Zoe looked around the cabin. It was the same luxurious space, but the atmosphere felt different. The crew seemed more aware, more engaged, their professionalism rooted in genuine respect rather than rote procedure. The story of what had happened to her, though never officially detailed with her name, had permeated every level of the company. It had forced a conversation that was long overdue. Her father's response had been swift and total. Brenda Davies had vanished from the airline industry, unable to find work after the details of her dismissal were through industry back channels made known. Mr. Finney, after a formal reprimand from his employer, had sent a fawning, desperate letter of apology to Robert Monroe, which had gone unanswered. Mark Collins, the purser, had reportedly left the industry altogether, moving to a small town to start a new life away from the shame of his inaction. Dr. Petrova's involvement had been a masterstroke. Her passenger Bill of Rights was now printed in every seatback pocket, and her training modules were being hailed as a new industry standard. Aura Air's public apology owning their failure without excuses had been painful in the short term, but had earned them unexpected respect for their transparency in the long run. Zoe had become an unwitting catalyst for change. At first, the idea had made her uncomfortable, but she had come to embrace it. Her father had asked her to be a part of the process, to speak via video, to protect her privacy to the new groups of trainees, not to recount her humiliation, but to talk about what it feels like to be seen, truly seen as a person. As the plane took off, soaring above the clouds, Zoe looked out the window. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a reminder, a living symbol of her father's promise. She picked up her pencil and began to sketch the clouds, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. The ugly incident had left a scar, but it was a scar that had ultimately pointed the way to healing, not just for her, but for the entire airline that bore her family's name. The air around them had truly changed, and in the quiet hum of the engines, she could hear the sound of a promise being kept.